In our journey from the present, we've traveled across South Africa through time, way back 164,000 years. In Cape Town, Jackie Friedling showed how our recent ancestors' bones tell a story of mixed origins across continents. In the Malutis, Manomfanelo Matrekiswana is living proof of how our ancient San ancestors mingled with our ancestors from the north. At Mapimgubwe, we farmed. We worked with iron and with gold, in a tradition which Innocent Pikirai tells us covered more than half of our continent, in a trade which covered half the world. In the Cederberg with John Parkington, we saw artworks from a tradition stretching more than 10,000 years. At Eisefontein with Dave Halkett, we learned how archaeologists work through layers of earth to reveal secrets of early modern human life on the west coast. With Karen van Niekerk, we saw fish remains telling a story of how our ancestors there were possibly the first in the world to master the advanced skill of fishing. But it was inside the caves of the South Cape coast with Chris Henshelwood and Curtis Marion that we connect with our most ancient ancestors. People with the skill and intellect to produce beautiful tools, and quite possibly the first jewelry ever. And way back then, there were fewer of us than you'd imagine.
You know, history has always fascinated me. I loved history. But the reason I started studying archaeology is because I found archaeology much more of a hands-on kind of discipline. The other reason, besides Indiana Jones, was the fact that I like the idea that to know the present, to really know the present, you have to understand the past.
After I left university, archaeologists made some amazing new discoveries. And today, scientists say they can go so far back in time that they can trace the very first ancestors of everybody in the world. Apparently, it's so far back in time, there were no black people or white people. They were just people.
Old bones are what I specialize in, but there's another group of physical anthropologists who don't study old bones, but they study genetic differences between living individuals. Now, that's an interesting issue because there are different messages coming from old bones and genes. What old bones tell us about is what people look like, how they acted in the past. What the genes of living people do is they tell us about lineage. So they tell us about ancestry. Now, we could do that here. We could draw a little bit of blood from you and a little bit of blood from me and send it off to the correct lab. And what it would tell us the last time that you and I shared a common ancestor. We might get a big surprise.
The pool that left Africa to go and occupy Europe and Asia and Australia, that squeeze was no more than 1,000 individuals.
Wow.
So the rest of the gene pool in the world is derived from a limited number of ancestors who came out of Africa.
When you compare the amount of genetic variability in each part of the world, that tells you how long people have lived there. The more variability, the longer they've lived in a given place. This is from the lineage genetics. When you do that study, Africa flags number one. It is by far the place on the planet where humans have lived the longest since separating at 150,000 years ago. It's telling us that peoples from Asia, peoples from Europe do not have the same length of lineage as people from Africa. That tells us right away that if we want to look for the origins of those modern humans, it's not a parallel process happening in Asia and Europe and Africa, but it's an African process that moves out of Africa and replaces the people in other parts of the world.
This is the story of genetics. A little piece of our ancestors left behind in our blood, in every cell, in every one of our bodies.